Poland, September 1939. The German foe begins its ruthless march of conquest. On September 1st, Danzig is incorporated into the Reich, and all Europe is aflame. World War II is a reality.
September 1st, 1939. This is the day Hitler incited the invasion of Poland, which would become the primary motive for France and Britain's entry into World War II against Germany. Shortly before this German offensive on Poland, however, Germany and Russia signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a 10-year accord where the two nations agreed to not wage war against one another, nor align with a power that is at war with the treaty's participants. Although Germany and Russia were relatively happy with this agreement, as it loosened the tensions between the two during the Second World War, there was one country that became ultimately isolated and had its sovereignty threatened: Finland. Over the course of the Winter and Continuation War, Finland would prove Russia's incompetence to the world and also show that a nation united among a common goal could withstand any superpower.
Before the outbreak of World War II, Finland and Russia were experiencing growing tensions when Russia announced intentions of expanding their land into the Karelian Isthmus, a strip of land southeast of Finland that acted as a bridge between Finland and Russia. Russia's motive sprouted from the want for a larger land buffer between Leningrad and the Finnish border, as they wanted more security from any possible threats during the World War. This is irrational because during this time of conflict, the distance between Leningrad, one of Russia's most important cities, and the Finnish border was only 11 miles. In November of 1939, Russia officially proposed an agreement to expand their land to all of the Karelian Isthmus, which would create a buffer of 27 miles between Leningrad and the border of Finland. Finland ultimately refused this proposal, which led to Russia mobilizing its troops. Finally, on November 30th, the Soviets launched an attack on Finland, which began the Winter War.
When over 1 million Soviets crossed the Soviet-Finnish border in Karelian Isthmus, the Finns stayed calm and waited for instruction through their military commander, Karl Mannerheim. Mannerheim was already an experienced veteran by the time war broke out, as he served in the Russian military in his 20s. He used his basic knowledge of Russian military strategies to gain a small advantage, but it didn't change the fact that the Russians outnumbered the Finns 3 men to 1. So, Mannerheim devised a plan to cause as many Soviet deaths as possible in the early months of the war to encourage foreign support of Finland and quickly get the Soviets to the negotiating table to end the war. He started to enact this plan less than a month after the start of the war, December 23rd, when he led a Finnish counteroffensive that temporarily pushed back Soviet lines in Karelia. Although the counteroffensive itself was unsuccessful in maintaining its borders, Mannerheim did succeed in putting Russian officers on edge about when the next Finnish offensive would be held.
Mannerheim had the freedom to lead this counteroffensive because of the favorable Finnish government. The Finnish government, led by President Kyösti Kallio, opted to give the commanders complete control over the course of the war instead of micromanaging their field marshal. Finnish freedom gave Soviet military officials a much more unpredictable enemy, which hindered their military successes. This freedom toward Finnish commanders also reached the lower ranks in the military. Commanders granted snipers the ability to venture apart from the main forces, to catch the Russians off guard. The lower ranks' most advantageous use of this freedom, however, was the use of unrestricted guerrilla warfare, a type of asymmetric warfare that breaks standardized expectations of a national army and instead focuses on unpredictability and creation of chaos all around enemy lines. It's in this doctrine that Finland introduced one of the most notorious troubles in warfare, the Molotov cocktail.
You ready upstairs? Yeah. Okay, toss them!
Named after the Soviet foreign minister at the time, Vyacheslav Molotov, the Molotov easily destroyed tanks with their scorching temperatures. Although these were massive advancements toward the Finnish ability to defend against the Russians, there was one person who can be credited most for Finland's ability to whittle away at Russian forces: the White Death.
Simo Häyhä was born on the 17th of December 1905 in Karelia. He grew up as a farmer but enjoyed skiing, shooting, and most importantly, hunting. He joined the Finnish forces at 33 years old when the Winter War began, and served a total of 98 days with the 6th Battalion, Infantry Regiment 34. Häyhä was practically undetected by Russian troops, but his kills did not go unnoticed by Russian officers. They called him the White Death, due to his camouflage into the snow-covered hills of Finland. On top of his white camouflage, he would build up snowdrifts around his position to further obscure himself. The snowbanks also served as padding for his rifle and prevented the force of his gunshots from stirring up a puff of snow that an enemy could use to locate him. With each successful retreat, he proved the incompetence of the Soviet military as he often fled unscathed.
Yet the Soviet incompetence wasn't only showcased by a singular figure, as in several battles during the war, the Finns would exploit Soviet weaknesses, allowing them to hold strong. What let the Finns hold was the overwhelming defensive line of fortifications and land forts, the Mannerheim Line. Although never officially named as such during the Winter War, nor fully built, the defensive capabilities proved so intense that the Soviet morale took a blow, and the Soviet Union resorted to propaganda in order to exaggerate its power.
Still, despite its defensive capabilities, the Soviets were in some cases able to outflank or, at a certain point of the war, break through the fortified line, as was in the Battle of Kola, lasting from December 7, 1939 until March 13, 1940. The Soviet troops thrusted against this sector and opened grave possibilities to outflank the Finnish line of defense. Despite weaknesses in the Finnish lines, the Soviet incompetence would take the lead because the Soviets couldn't take advantage of this moment, and the battle would thus last until the end of the war and be considered a Finnish victory. This battle is one of utmost importance to the Soviet-Finnish War, since the famous dialogue between Major General Haglund and Lieutenant Arane Jutilinen would occur. As the general would question, "Will Kola hold?" To which the lieutenant replied, "Kola will hold unless the orders are to run away," showing the strong Finnish resolve during the war's duration.
With both sides greatly exhausted from war, the Soviet forces ordered large-scale artillery bombardments of Finnish forces. The successes of the operations, alongside the Finnish forces running low on ammunition, prompted the Finnish to sue for peace. In the resulting Moscow Peace Treaty, signed on March 12, 1940, the Soviets would attain 11% of Finnish territory. However, Finland was agreed to retain its sovereignty and independence. At the cost of 300,000 Soviet and 65,000 Finnish troops, both sides took a large hit, but the Soviets were hit especially hard and showed their military incompetence.
However, that wasn't the only peace treaty that was signed in this time. Shortly after the signage of the Treaty of Moscow, Finland allowed Germany to pass their troops through Finnish land after the growing conflict emerged between Germany and the Soviet Union in June of 1941. The Finns couldn't resist the temptation of another war against their rivals, so they also joined the war effort against the Soviet Union with their new ally, Germany. Alongside the president's visions of a greater Finland, this act of Finland resurfacing conflict with the Soviet Union began the Winter War's continuation.
The Continuation War, unlike its predecessor, saw the Finnish troops on the offensive. Finland joined the war alongside Germany 3 days after the original invasion, which was on June 22, 1941, to fight the Soviet Union after the Soviet Air Force conducted air raids on Finnish cities. By September 1941, Finland had regained its post-Winter War concessions to the Soviet Union in Karelia. Finland then cooperated with German troops to lay siege on Leningrad by cutting northern supply routes and digging in until 1944. However, all of this success would be eventually turned around. On June through August of 1944, the Soviet Vyborg-Petrozavodsk offensive drove the Finns from most of the territories they had gained during the war. The offensive was halted, but the defense wouldn't last long, as the Moscow armistice would be signed on September 19, 1944.
The Finnish war effort began to die out after some Finns became reluctant to cross the old Finnish border into Soviet territory, splitting the population between those who wanted to cross and the more traditional Finns who wanted to stick to their roots in Finland. After Soviets regained their footing and pushed back into the Karelian Isthmus, the culmination of the instability came when Risto Ryti, Finland's 5th president, resigned. In this period of governmental instability in Finland, there was one man who once again stood up to the challenge of reducing tensions, Mannerheim. He became Finland's 6th president and quickly began negotiations for the Moscow Armistice. This armistice was signed between the Soviet Union and Finland, with Soviet conditions that Finland recognize the Treaty of Moscow and that all German forces in the Soviet Union be evacuated. Along with this treaty, the Soviets demanded $300 million in reparations within 6 years and for the Finns to cede Petsamo, an area in northern Finland, to the Russians.
The terms of the Moscow Armistice were reiterated in Paris on February 10, 1947, which finally ended the war. As Mannerheim put it, "We have not fled, we were prepared to fight to the last man. We carry our heads high because we fought with all our might for 3.5 months. More than that, one can scarcely demand." What Mannerheim describes as sisu, the Finnish word for stoic determination, tenacity of purpose, bravery, resilience, and hardiness. It explains extraordinary determination in the face of extreme adversity, and courage that is presented typically in situations where success is unlikely. The word has become integrated into Finnish culture to describe national unity, as all its aspects would be further tied to Finnish struggles for sovereignty in the face of an expansionist superpower. Finnish determination ultimately allowed it to retain its absolute independence, both cartographically and politically, from Soviet communism. Its ability to hold its ground would prove Finnish resolve, maintain the nation's stability, and form the nation's role as the Eastern European bastion of democracy. Winston Churchill encapsulated all of this in his January 1940 speech.
Only Finland, superb, nay, sublime. Sublime in the jaws of peril. Finland shows what free men can do. The service rendered by Finland to mankind is magnificent. They have exposed for all the world to see many illusions about Soviet Russia have been dispelled in these few fierce weeks of fighting in the Arctic Circle.